We've talked about understanding the basic structure of the USMLE Step 2 CK exam. We've talked about understanding the questions and how they're constructed and your thought process on the questions. Now let's turn our attention to your actual preparation, your study, your getting ready to take this exam. Your main problem getting ready for your Step 2 CK exam is easy to articulate, but frankly a little bit hard to solve. We have to get you to do things that get you a good result instead of things that simply help you feel good. This is actually something that's not all that easy to solve. See, we're all biological entities, and as such we're pre-programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So left to your own devices, you're very likely to make choices that help you feel good, but unfortunately not always the choices that help you get a good result on the exam. The USMLE Step 2 CK exam, it's about pain. I'd like to make this process as nice as possible for you, but I have to be honest, there's pain involved here. So really, I can't get rid of the pain for you. All I can do is get you to make a basic choice. When do you want your pain? Now or on exam day? If you do your preparation correctly, then preparation will not be fun, but exam day will be stunningly much easier than you expect. If you don't do your preparation correctly, then your preparation will be okay, but exam day will be an awful experience. There's going to be pain. You have to decide when you want your pain. The right choice is take the pain now. Make exam day the easy day. So let's try to talk through some strategies to use to get yourself ready to organize yourself for your exam. Now, as always, I see myself here as your coach. As I told you before, I expect that all of you know how to study. You know pretty well how to get information in large quantities into your brain so it can be useful. My job is not to talk to you like you know nothing about this, but it's once again to be your coach, to get you to look at what you do and focus on the fundamentals. Check your basics and see how you can do it better. So here's my recommendations. First and foremost, make sure you focus most on the areas where you're the weakest. Now, left to their own devices, most students do exactly the opposite. Most students spend excess time on subjects they already know pretty well. You like OBGYN, as you're getting ready for Step 2 CK, you spend excess time on OBGYN. Why? You like it. But more than you like it, you're good at it. And so when you're studying, you feel good. Look, I know this, you say. I'm a good doctor, you say, patting yourself on the back. I have this information down. And you never quite have the time to study that content where you're weak. You want to avoid the weakness because the weakness doesn't help you feel good. But folks, you got to address and fix those weak areas if you're going to excel in the exam. It's simply much easier to take you from low to mid-range in a subject than it is to take you from mid-range to high. The way to get your best score is not to excel in your strong areas, it's to bring your weak areas up to that mid-range where they at least don't hurt you. And now when I say focus on weak areas, I mean don't just say I'm focusing on internal medicine. There's some parts of internal medicine that you're pretty good at. There are other parts of internal medicine that you're not so good at. Make sure within each specialty you focus on the particular areas where you have some difficulties. How do you know where you're strong and where you're weak? Well, you can take a diagnostic exam. Hopefully you've already done that. But the results of the diagnostic exam are usually not a surprise to any students. You pretty much already know where you're relatively strong and relatively weak before we give you the diagnostic exam results. How do you know where you're strong and where you're weak? It's quite simple. If you like it, you're strong in it. If you hate it, you're weak in it. And so the advice I'm giving you here is simply translated. Study what you hate. You're sitting there, you have the book open in front of you, you're reading through the content, there's a big smile on your face. Yeah, turn the damn page. If you're happy, you're not doing this right. Study should not feel pleasant. Study should feel like you're working hard, concentrating. It shouldn't feel like a stroll through the park. It should feel like walking up a muddy hill, slipping back with the rain beating against your face. You ought to be pushing against the things you never got before. You ought to be filling the gaps on the content you've never quite mastered previously. This focus on the stuff you're weak in, the stuff you hate, is the #1 key issue to get you where you need on the exam. That which you're good in doesn't need nearly the preparation as that which you despise. Number 2, thinking like the question writers. The problem many students have getting ready for their Step 2 CK is they think like students. And being a student, there's nothing wrong with that. Being a student is a natural part of the process of getting ready to be a physician. But the problem is staying in the student mentality. Students didn't write your questions, faculty wrote your questions. And we have to induce you to learn to think like faculty so you can anticipate and be able to answer the questions you're going to see. Haven't you ever noticed that student and faculty deal with the world differently? If I give a big, thick book of content to a student, what does the student say? They open it up and they say, oh my goodness, how am I going to learn all this? Do I need this thing here? Do I need this chart on page 6? How about the footnote on the bottom page 9? Do I need that? Students are always saying, how do I learn all of this? Now, I know why you say that. You say that because, well, frankly, your faculty has lied to you. Sometime, think back, in medical school, overwhelmed by all the content you had to master, all the things you had to learn, you walked up to your faculty member before or after a big lecture, big thick textbook in hand, held out the book to your faculty member, and you asked the question. You know the question. What in here do I really have to learn? And all over the world the question gets asked, and all over the world the same answer gets given. Everything, they say. It's a lie. You do not have to learn everything. Some things are key, and some things are trivial. Some things are essential, you absolutely have to know them. You pretty much can guess they're going to be on the exam. Other things, frankly, the odds of them being on the exam are so low, you may safely not even give them much of your consideration. In order to get this differentiation, you have to stop thinking like student, how do I learn everything? You have to think like faculty. Faculty, if you look at it simply, have a very basic cognitive task. We have a large amount of knowledge, but only a limited amount of time to transmit that knowledge to you. The job of being a faculty is about making choices, deciding what we will say and, by implication, what we will leave out. Whenever I lecture, there's in my head a simple tripartite scheme. This is primary. Everybody in the room will get it. This is secondary. It's pretty important. You better get this. This is tertiary. You get it? Great. You don't get it? Really, who cares? Do you study like that? Or does every word on the page, does every piece of punctuation matter to you like it's a crucial thing? You have to learn to think like faculty do. Some things matter and some things don't. In short, it's about learning to make choices. The whole USMLE sequence is about learning to make choices. And the sooner you get good at making these choices, the better your exam performance will be. But let's be clear, the critical choices you're making are not the ones you're making on exam day when you're choosing letter A, B, C, D, E, etc. The crucial choices are all the ones you make up leading to exam day. I firmly believe the choices you make leading up to exam day pretty much predetermine what your choices will be on exam day. Exam day is nothing more than you simply showing the result of all the other choices you made up to that particular point. In short, to think like question writers, you have to start to make choices like faculty make choices. Faculty don't try to learn everything. You give the same textbook the student had to the faculty member. Faculty doesn't say, how do I learn all this? Faculty says, oh, I like this. Oh, I agree with that. Oh, this is wrong. Oh, that's not quite right. This is a new article. Faculty have, in short, a critical perspective, a way of looking at and evaluating, of organizing the information that is, frankly, unique to each individual faculty member. It's about having a structure, having an organization that holds the content, not about just accumulating an ever-increasing pile of knowledge. Think about it like this. Medical students preparing for exams, it's often like being out in the front yard of your house on a fall day when all the leaves have fallen off the tree. And students are out there with a rake desperately trying to get all the leaves into the pile so they have the leaf of knowledge they might need for the exam. Now that's a fine strategy until a gust of wind comes along. And now the leaves are simply blowing off down the street. Faculty, we're not raking leaves on the yard. Leaves are hanging off the tree. And even when a major gust of wind comes along and a leaf or two might get blown away, the basic structure of the tree holds the knowledge in place. This is what you need to be striving for. Not the ever-accumulating amount of facts in a pile, but an organizational structure that makes sense of this information which you're collecting. Now here's the good news. It turns out it doesn't matter what structure you have, as long as you have one. One of the things I've noticed as I've been helping Kaplan recruit and evaluate faculty, it's stunning to me that no two faculty members in the same subject area present the same content the same way. Even if they're equally good, no two people do exactly the same presentation. Now that's important because that tells you it doesn't matter what structure you have, it tells you that you have to have one. See, you have to begin to make choices. Something matters, something doesn't. You begin by choosing early which is which. I have a simple exercise. Look at a single page of content and don't tell me what matters on that page. Let's reverse it. Tell me what's not important. So go through any page of the Kaplan Notes and tell me what are the two things on the page you will not learn, because we already agreed you can't learn everything. And if you can't learn everything, then let's use your native intelligence to decide what's primary, what's secondary, and now, as we're talking about, what's tertiary. If it's not important, it doesn't deserve your focus. You're going to have to learn to make these decisions. Now, I know you don't want to make these decisions. I know you want to hold to the idea that you can learn everything, which you can't. And let's look at this rationally. If it's impossible to learn everything, which is true, then if you try to learn everything, you will fail. Yes? Okay. So if you try to learn everything, you're merely setting yourself up for failure. A better strategy would be to use your native intelligence to decide what matters and what doesn't matter, and therefore you're much more likely to focus on what are the essentials, which will then improve your score on the exam. Trying to learn everything, the gaps in your knowledge will be random. If you make choices, the gaps in your knowledge will be driven by intelligence and reasonable choice. Now, you won't always be correct about these choices. You may decide this one issue in pediatrics really doesn't matter, and then you go in to take your Step 1 exam, and the first question, the first block, is that pediatric issue you decided not to focus on. And now you feel bad, right? Well, you feel bad because you're missing the big picture. The picture you're missing is how many other questions out of the 370 you're going to get right because you had time, because you didn't focus on this really low yield issue, that one pediatric issue. You got to learn to make choices. You got to decide what matters and what doesn't matter, and you will get better at it as you go along. Now, your faculty will provide you guidance. The reason why you don't just sit and read the book by yourself, we have faculty to guide you, is so you can begin to watch how they make decisions, how they see the content. You can begin to get some input for your own decision process about what matters and what doesn't. When you're using the Kaplan material, we want you to follow a very simple three-step sequence. Kaplan's been using this sequence for several decades. It's pretty tried and true. It's called preview, view, and review. Preview. Before you sit and you listen to the faculty, you're going to look over the section of the notes that you're about to have the faculty talk to you about. Now, you're not looking at it to memorize it. You're looking at it to get the basic sense of the structure. What are the general outline? What are the key issues that are going to be addressed? This will help you make some decisions as to what you need to focus on, what you need to pay more attention to, and what may be less important as the presentation goes forward. Then view. You sit and you listen as the faculty reviews the content, presents it, provides examples, gives you a sense of emphasis, what matters and what doesn't matter. Remember, the faculty are not only giving you content review, they're giving you their determination about what's higher yield and what's lower yield. And then finally, review. Review is when afterwards you go away and you sit and go over the same content yourself. Now, listen, the rule in medical school is 3 to 4 hours of work outside of class for every 1 hour in class. The rule as you're doing your preparation for the Step 2 CK exam is really the reverse of that. It's roughly 1 hour of review for every 3 hours as you're sitting watching the faculty. See, because this should not be the first time you've seen this content. This is about you consolidating and getting a different level of understanding of the content. And by the way, when you walk out and do your review, do not simply look at every page in the syllabus. Some things, admit it, you got as the faculty was presenting. Don't sit and look over that again. If you've got it, you're simply wasting time. What you need to do is focus on the things you didn't get, that were not clear, that maybe you're confused about, and if necessary, go back and review, that is, re-look at the content as the faculty presents it again. All of those ideas are a nice introduction to getting your study together, but here, ladies and gentlemen, is the big idea. Like all big ideas, it's easy to say, but profound in its implication. The big idea begins with a very simple premise. You're studying for a multiple choice exam. Multiple choice exam requires you to do a very basic cognitive process. Choose among presented options. With that idea in mind, you must make sure that all of your preparation prepares you for that basic choice, choosing among presented options. Some of you might have in the past prepared for oral exams or written exams. This is different preparation. In an oral exam, you get top marks for being able to talk about details that nobody else is really cognizant of. On a multiple choice exam, all those esoteric details do not matter. They're not on your exam. See, in a multiple choice exam, no one's going to ever ask you, tell me everything you know about blank. Instead, they're going to say, which one of these choices should it be? A different process. Let's be clear. Suppose you're the world's leading expert on diabetes. You know more about diabetes than anybody in the history of mankind. People call you from all around the world, email you from all around the globe, getting your advice and insight about dealing with diabetes. Let's be clear, 99% of what you know is useless for the Step 2 CK exam. Because no one's ever going to say to you, tell me all about diabetes. Instead, they're going to say, which diagnosis is it, which diabetes is one? Or they're going to say, what should you do in response for this patient with diabetes? It's not about saying what you know, it's about choosing among presented options. This means your study must prepare you for that simple choice. And this means never learn individual things, always learn sets of things. Never learn about a particular diagnosis, always learn a set of differentials. Never learn about a particular drug for pharmacology, always learn about a class of drugs and then how to select within them. Never learn about particular pathogens, always learn a class of pathogens and then how you're going to select within them. Your job is to organize material the way you're going to have to do it on the exam, namely choosing among the options. Not telling people about things, choosing among the options. I say this is a big deal because I've worked for years trying to understand why some people work and study hard but don't get a good score on the exam, while other people work and study hard and get masterfully good scores on the exam. This is the difference, folks. If you're trying to learn it so you can talk about it and tell about it, then you look smart, but you're not going to get the question right. If you study it so you can make the choice you're going to see, you not only are preparing for the questions you're going to see, in a very broad sense, you're anticipating the questions you're going to see. Because the core sets that you're learning are going to be the options that are presented on the exam. Let me be concrete. If you're someone who uses flashcards and you're trying to learn about basic pharmacology options for treatment, if your flashcards have the name of a drug on one side and on the reverse side detailed information about the drug, the biochemical composition, some side effect issues, that's pretty much a waste of time. What your flashcard ought to have is the label of the class of drugs, the key drugs in the class on one side, and on the reverse side, the key criterion that tell you when to give drug A versus drug B versus drug C. Why? Because that's going to be your question on the Step 2 CK. They're not going to ask you to tell about a particular drug. They're going to ask you to choose among these different treatment options. Your job is to learn sets and then learn to discriminate within the set. You have to learn what are the options and then be able to pick the option. And folks, this is not only preparation for Step 2 CK, this is preparation to be a physician. Stripped of all rhetoric, what is it a physician actually does day in and day out? You walk into a room where there's a patient. You gather information, you collect details, you may get lab values or other outside information, you wrap all that information together, make a determination about what's going on, you have in your head a set of options for how to proceed, and then you pick an option. This is, quite frankly, what we pay you for. If you're encyclopedic in your knowledge, but confronted with the patient, you don't know what option to pick, you're not a physician. Physicians are not about knowing, they're about doing. They're about being able to make that right selection. And folks, on the Step 2 CK exam, we'll even give you the options. You don't have to know what the options are. We'll give them to you. All you have to know is how to make the proper choice. The way you're going to get ready for this choice, I didn't tell you don't have to learn details. You do have to learn details. Let's be clear. You have to learn the right details. The details that are, here's the key phrase, decision relevant. In short, if it helps you decide, you better learn it. And if it doesn't help you decide, then it's mere cocktail party conversation. It makes you look smart and it doesn't improve your score. Sometimes, as I'm traveling around the United States or indeed around the world, I stop off at a Kaplan Center where students are sitting watching DVDs, as you might be doing. They have their notes in front of them, watching the professor, and I walk up behind them, take my finger, stick it on a spot in the notes, and I ask the question, why are you studying this? Stunningly, I always get the same answer. You know what answer I get? Because it might be on the exam. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not how physicians think. That's how students think. Students learn something because it might be on the exam. Physicians learn something because of what you can do with it, because of what it enables you to do, because the understanding and the correct process it lets you engage. I need to learn this because it lets me know the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. You're right, that's important. You better learn that. I need to learn this because it lets me know whether I give this antibiotic or another antibiotic. You're right, that's important. You better learn that. But if it doesn't help you make a decision, in all earnestness, forget it. It won't help improve your score. It's not about looking smart. It's about making the right decisions. In short, if you don't know why something matters, then it doesn't deserve your attention. Let me try to present this a little bit differently. When we're watching people's process making decisions on USMLE questions, it's really a two-step process. You have a clinical case where you're getting information. Let's say I present you with a clinical case of a patient who has unipolar disorder, major depression. And the question we're going to ask you, fairly straightforward one, is what treatment you're going to give. Well, the first decision you make is a sort of global one, a sense of what's going on and a sense of what's the general issues involved. And so you say, well, this patient's depressed. What I need to do is give an antidepressant. But now you look at response options, and there they are, 5 antidepressants. So knowing you need an antidepressant doesn't get you home. The second step of the process is when you pick that exact correct choice. You're going to pick that exact correct choice by looking at the details presented in the question. This circle here presents the question stem, and the X's embedded in the circle are the key information given, which summed together directs you to one and only one of these options. This is your core job on the exam. Not knowing in general I need to give an antidepressant, but which one. That's the essential decision. And if you know what the key criterion are, it's obvious what the decision must be. The reason why we need to keep focusing you on the question stem is those are the clues that let you converge on the one best choice. This issue of learning clusters and then being able to choose within the clusters is the core cognitive process for the exam. But I want to change and talk about something else, a little bit different. Traditionally, it's very difficult to get doctors and medical school students into study groups. And in this way, lawyers are so much smarter than you are. See, lawyers learn early in law school that if they're going to get through this, they can't do it on their own. They work together, the information cross-pollinates, and as everybody learns, everybody does better. But in medicine, that's not the way the process tends to work. In medicine, it's all about, for most people, individual learning. You go and gather all the books you can, You go back to your room, you close the door, you set all the materials in a little semicircle around you, you sit cross-legged, and you wait for enlightenment to occur. This is not the most efficient process for getting ready for the exam. I'm going to strongly suggest that you think about forming study groups with some of your peers to help you through this process of preparation. Now, students often tell me when I suggest study groups, well, Doc, I don't go to study groups because I don't learn anything in study groups. Right. You're not going to study groups to learn. You're going to study groups to discover. Discover what? Yeah, where you're ignorant. Done correctly, the reason you go to study groups is so you can look stupid in front of your peers. And that is, you admit to me, the reason why you don't want to go. You'd rather sit by yourself in your room, cloaked in the illusion that you've got it all already. Do you? Do you really? How do you know you've got it all? Well, I'll tell you. If you can sit with your peers, have a discussion, argue, defend for a position that you have, then you can feel very confident that you've got it, you understand it, and you can handle it for the exam. Sitting by yourself does not give you the reality check you need. And so, a strong recommendation, you form study groups. Who should be in your study groups? Not your drinking buddies. You want to go out drinking, that's fine, but don't pretend you're studying while you're doing so. My recommendation, your study group should be 3 to 5 people of varying expertise. If you're going to be a pediatrician, you're going to be a pediatrician, you're going to be a pediatrician, don't form a study group together. Let's get people of diverse expertise. Someone who wants to be OBGYN, with someone who's going to cardiology, with someone who's going to psychiatry. That's a reasonable study group. I strongly recommend, if at all possible, you don't form a study group with people from your school, your medical school. Because people from the same medical school tend to be weak and strong in the same things. What you want is to get together people from a different school, where their strengths can countervail your weaknesses and vice versa. Remember, the point here is to work together so the rising tide indeed floats every boat. Not individual effort by itself, but the group effort helps to really turbocharge an individual effort. Now let's be clear. The primary, the dominant studying you will do by yourself in isolation. I didn't say preparation for the USMLE exam is a collective effort, but having this study group is a good way to turbocharge, to add additional force and power, efficiency if you will, to your valuable study time. My recommendation is you should meet with your study group about 3 times a week, 2 hours each time, a 6-hour commitment, that's it. When you meet with your study group, what should you do? Well, whatever you think is useful is fine with me, but here's some concrete recommendations. The first hour that you meet, each person's study group should give a brief presentation, 10 minutes maybe, on some subject we all decided last time we met you're crappy in. Not what you're good in, what we've all discovered you're bad in. Because once you work up, once you present that subject that you're very bad in, it will no longer be your worst subject. Now, it may never be your best subject, but you'll at least begin to pull yourself up to that median range, which is where we want everybody at least to be. After you do your presentation, the other people in the study group should provide a brief critique. Just a minute or two suggesting something else you might think about, something you might have gotten wrong, something else that should be, well, added or filtered into your presentation. Now, don't feel like people are going to lay into you and call you stupid because, well, after you present and they critique you, what's next? Oh, that's right. They present and you critique them. So a norm of collegiality tends to develop where people are somewhat gentle with each other as they're going through this process. For the second hour of your time together, I'd like you to do questions together. What I'd like you to do is fresh questions, questions nobody's ever seen before. You take the question, you all, at the same time, turn the question over, and you have a minute, or you want to give yourself a little bit more time, a minute and 10 seconds, and then at the end of that time, you must declare your answer. Once each person has declared their answer, now comes the key part of the process, defend your answer. Lay out what your thought process was that got you to that particular solution. See, we're trying to make sure that you're not getting idiosyncratic, that you're not getting painfully unique in the way you're looking at and processing the content you're studying. When you stay by yourself, there's a tendency to understand things in your own way, and that's fine, except You have to learn to see the questions on the exam and to answer the questions on the exam the way everybody else does. Folks, it's a multiple choice exam. What does that mean? Bluntly, people that do the best on the exam are people that read the questions the way they're intended to be read and give the answer that's intended to be given. This is not an exercise in brilliance, it's an exercise in conformity. The people that do the best are the ones that are most clued in to the average, that see things the way everybody else sees them. People that have the most trouble with this exam are simply people outside the range. People who have not prepared enough, so they're not seeing things like everybody else, or people that have prepared too much and they're seeing things that the question writer never expects you to see. Why are you meeting with your peers? To make sure you're seeing things like your peers do. Your peers are your guardrails, your reality check to make sure the way you're seeing the content, what you think is important, is what they think is important. Now, you're adults, you can make your own decisions, but study groups are an excellent way to add points to your score. That was a talk through some strategies for preparation. Let's take a few brief moments and just talk through some tactical issues. First, if you're really trying to learn something and learn it well, spaced repetition is better than mass practice. Now that's a complicated way of saying looking at something you want to learn a little bit every day is better than looking at it a lot within one day. So if there's some section that you're really trying to master for the exam, don't say, I'm going to look at this today until I get it. Look at it some today, some tomorrow, some the next day, some the next day. You want to make sure you have that repeated exposure because that's what makes it stick in your mind. Second, sleep is an important part of your study process. You should know this as basic content for your exam, but you should also apply that content to yourself. You all know that if you only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, you're shorting yourself on REM sleep. REM sleep is when a certain kind of memory, the memory that helps you think and problem solve, is consolidated. During the different other stages of sleep, you get your rote memory, the kind that goes A goes with B. That's a stage 2 sleep issue. But during REM sleep is when you get the big picture, when you have a sense of how things fit together and integrate, which is what your Step 2 CK exam is about. If you're going to learn that, you're going to have the sleep time to allow your brain to make that process happen. You need REM sleep. And the only way you're going to get that is to sleep more. Every one of you should be sleeping at least 6.5 and frankly, at least 7 hours a night. And if you're not doing that, start tonight. If you're studying a lot and sleeping little, you're simply not going to remember what you're studying. And that's a bad choice. Folks, oftentimes we stay up, we don't sleep, because as we're getting ready for the exam, we say to ourselves, look at the effort I'm putting in. Look at how hard I'm working. And you feel almost heroic in your effort. But folks, as gently as I can, nobody cares. Nobody cares about your effort. Nobody cares how heroic you are. All anybody cares about is the score you get at the end of the process. So stop suffering when the suffering doesn't help you. You need to get sleep. You should already know, but I'll remind you, if you're getting on average 5 hours of sleep a night, you're functioning on any cognitive task I can give you at the level of someone who's legally drunk. You need sleep. Arrange it, get it. Sleep is not a sign that you're lazy. Sleep is a sign that you're intelligent. Sleep is, in short, a part of your study process. Now, you all know this from your own experience if you just stop and think about it. You've all had at least many experiences usually, where you've looked at some content late at night before you went to bed, it didn't make any sense, in frustration you hurled the book across the room and you collapsed into your bed. And the morning when you woke up, it all made sense. Why? Because your brain is not idle. During REM sleep, your brain is alert and processing, not unlike it is right now as you're sitting and listening to me. You have to give your brain time to do that if you're going to really understand the content that you're studying. When you study, you need to take breaks. When you're watching videos, you need to take breaks. You don't simply sit there and do something hour after hour, because your brain's capacity to focus, concentrate, and derive benefit tails off dramatically after roughly 1 hour. We often lecture in live lectures in a 50-minute hour, and you should study, frankly, the same way. I sometimes talk to students and say with pride, I studied for 9 hours straight today. I didn't leave my chair. I didn't eat. I didn't go to the bathroom. I just sat here all day. And they say that with pride, and I'm frankly horrified because they've just wasted the day. When you need a break, take a break. Get up, go to the bathroom, splash water on your face, get a drink, have some bite to eat, but then sit down and study again. And if you can't sit down and study again, in the sense that these breaks keep getting longer and longer, take a simple page out of behavioral psychology. Buy yourself a clock, set it for 10 minutes, and when the clock rings, ding, sit down and begin your next round of study again. Fourth, practice on recall. There's a strong tendency to keep focused on getting the information inside so you have it for the exam. We need you to actually be able to do something with the information, and that's what recall is about. I think the best way to try to get you to understand what I mean by this idea of recall is to walk through a series of steps that we find people take as they're mastering the content the way they need to on the exam. In order to get the content you need and get it at the depth with the perspective you need for your Step 2 CK, we talk about 4 simple steps. The underlying theme here is simple but important. As your familiarity with the content changes, what you do in your preparation should be changing. The first step in this process is called highlight. Highlight is when you're making 2 basic decisions. 1, what are you going to study from? And 2, what within that content are you going to learn? Well, if you've signed up to take the Kaplan course, you've already now made the first decision. What are you going to study from? Is the Kaplan material by itself sufficient for the exam? Students tell us year in and year out, yes. I really want to strongly recommend you focus on one source for each subject, and I'd like to think the Kaplan materials are something that speak to you. If you discover that a section of the Kaplan notes do not, then put them aside and get another source. That's the right decision. But by and large, focus on one source for each subject. Then you have to choose what within that content you're going to learn. This is when your colored marker, the highlighter, comes into play. This is where you're going through, underlining, highlighting what is key, what are the primary things you're going to focus on. By implication, you will highlight some things and not highlight others. You will select some things in and leave some things out. This is your choice process. If your notes blossom into a multicolored rainbow hue of different shades, yes, you're not doing this right. You need to not highlight everything. You need to highlight some and not others. Now, your faculty will help you do this. As you listen to lectures, you will hear about what matters most and what matters less. But it's useful to have you do this yourself in that preview period as a way to begin to get a grip on what are the essential elements within the material. Once you've had all the material highlighted that you're going to study, you then move to repetition. Repetition, I won't talk to you about for very long, because this is something I know you all know how to do fairly well. It's how you got this far in your medical career. Repetition is when you read the material so you now have it in your brain. To do this, you read it once, twice, that's enough for most content, 3 times for the hard stuff, and then it's in your brain. You've got what you need. We know this, and I can say this affirmatively, from research done, frankly, back in the 1950s. If we open up your skull, we zap the right place in your cortical regions with an electrode, you will remember with full sight, sound, smell, the content that is stored there. It's in your brain. Congratulations. You've got it there. And now that it's in your brain, you don't do more repetition. Doing more repetition once it's in your brain doesn't get it in your brain further. It just, frankly, is a waste of time at this point. If you're a farmer, plowing the field 4 times doesn't give you a better crop. You plow it and then you're done. It's time to move on to the next step. Your next step is recall. Recall is not about getting it into your brain. Recall is about getting it out again. And this is the step we're going to talk about for a while here, because the one that most people neglect. How often have you taken an exam or done practice questions, read a question and said, all right, I've studied this. I have no idea what the answer is for this question. Well, what's going on in your brain in that moment is important. What's going on in your brain in that moment is the following. The content you need is in your brain. It's in your cortical regions. Your problem, you can't find it. It's there, you simply are unable to recover it, so functionally it's as if it's never there. You did the first step you need to do, get it into your brain. You did not complete the circuit by getting a process to get it out again. Getting information into your brain is about getting written in the cortical regions. Getting information out of your brain is about getting it indexed. That's a midbrain issue focused in the hippocampus. Hippocampus is not where information is stored. It's a map of the external world and the internal world. And the internal world is an index that tells you where to go and get the information. If you're computer literate, think about the hippocampus as your file allocation table. It's not where the information is stored, that's on the hard drive, but it's the index that tells you where to go and retrieve the information. If you have the information on the hard drive but no index for retrieval, then the information is essentially lost. Let's try this simple metaphor to get you to understand the process. Your cortical regions are the stacks of a large library. When you're studying, when you're doing your repetition, you're putting books on the shelves of the library. But suppose I stack the library full of books, but I never tell the librarian what I've done, and I don't put the books in the card catalog. Well, then now I have a library full of information, but no one will ever find it and use it. In order to make that information usable, you have to get it indexed. It must be in the card catalog, and this is what the hippocampus is about. Your cortical regions are again the stacks of the large library. Your hippocampus is the card catalog that tells you where to go and retrieve the information. In order to be able to use what you study, you have to focus on this retrieval process. Now, to get information encoded cortically, it's about attention and concentration. That's how your cortical regions function. In order to get the retrieval process to work, it's about doing something active with the content. The midbrain is about activity. So if you're going to get retrieval, you must do an active process. The good news is there's a whole lot of active processes you can do, and it doesn't seem to matter which one you choose. You can make an outline, write notes, draw a picture. You can make up a song, you can draw a graph. All these are core processes to buffer your retrieval. But notice what I'm saying. Drawing the graph is better than studying the graph. Writing the outline is better than simply rereading the words over and over again. What you're doing is reframing it in a way that makes sense to you so you can retrieve the information when you need it. But even beyond this, lose the notion that unless you're face down with your nose in a book, you're not studying. Because you can do this recall exercise literally anytime. You're stuck in traffic, driving through town, sit there and talk about the differential diagnosis to yourself that you just learned the night before. You're waiting on the platform for a train to come when you're commuting. Talk to yourself about the treatment options for this particular diagnosis and what are the different criterion that would cause you to choose one over the other. This is the essence of the recall exercise. The reason I want you in small groups is that forces you pretty much to do more of this recall exercise. And the other thing that helps you do the recall exercise is practice questions. We want you to do practice questions because they help this recall. They help you do something active with the content, and they also help you with the fourth stage, which is simply practice. Learning the basic skills of demonstrating your knowledge in the multiple choice exams. I talked about a lot of this at the beginning of this series of instruction. How are you going to blend together your time with content study with practice questions? Well, I first have to remind you of what your goal is in this process. You're not simply trying to memorize content that you can spit back on the exam. Memorization is the foundation you must end up at the end at a much higher level process. This triangle lays out for you, well, what we sometimes call a knowledge pyramid. There are 4 basic levels of knowledge. Recognition, you know it when you see it. Memorization, this is where you now can call it to mind. Problem solving, when you can take the pieces, combine them, and come up with a solution to a problem you maybe never encountered before. And finally, innovation, where you have unique knowledge which is being constructed or identified. Forget innovation. This is a USMLE exam. It's not about new knowledge. It's about existing knowledge. What I'm trying to make sure you're clear on is, well, medical school usually focuses on recognition and memorization. USMLE, it's about memorization and problem solving. And as you move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, you move increasingly into the problem solving domain. You have to learn not so you can tell what you've read, but so you can use what you've read, apply it to basic problems that you're presented with. How are you going to blend together content study and practice questions to accomplish this? This simple rectangle gives you the core of how I want you to think about this process. The width of this rectangle represents your total study time. For some of you that might be a series of months, for some of you it might be even half a year or longer, but all of you have the same endpoint, namely exam day. Well, the key take-home message here, I hope, is fairly transparent. At the start of your process, most of your time and energy is spent at content study, with just a little bit of time doing practice questions. Yes, start doing practice questions a little bit at the beginning to get yourself familiar with, to get your head in the game. As you go through your process, you begin to add more questions until right before the exam, most of your time is spent focusing on questions. But note, you're not entirely done with content study. Many of you love practice questions. You want to get to practice questions as soon as you can. But I have to make it clear to you, practice questions are not your escape from study. Done correctly, practice questions should always drive you back to study more. Now, here we have yet another issue where what makes you feel good and what gets you a good score are two very separate things. When you do a practice question and you get it right, it helps you feel good, right? When you do a practice question and you get it wrong, you feel terrible, right? Well, the problem is, it's the questions you get wrong that are actually helping to improve your score. Questions you get right, what do you learn? Nothing. I got it right. Questions you get wrong, what you've done is identify a deficit, detect a problem, and now you can fix the problem. See, questions by themselves do not teach you. Questions test you. But seen correctly, questions provide guidance as to where your future study should be. When you do a question, you get it wrong, I know you feel bad, but what I'd like you to do is feel good that you've detected the problem, because now you can go and fix the problem. Questions are not about giving you a score that helps you feel good. Questions are deficit detection mechanisms. Find the problem so you can fix it. When you get a practice question wrong, feel glad that you discovered the deficit now, before the exam, instead of during the exam when it's too late to do anything to correct the issue. Here are the rules that I want you to follow as you're doing your practice questions. First, you're going to study first and then do questions, both in the course of your preparation and within a day of study. Don't do questions in the morning, do questions in the afternoon after you've done study in the morning. Second, focus first on your Cube book and then move to Cube Bank. In Cube book, the questions are organized by specialty. So when you start a question, you know the specialty that question is from. One of the beauties of Cube Bank is, as in the real exam, you don't know what the question's about until you get substantially far into the question. In order to get yourself ready for the real exam, Cube Bank gets you closer. Now, Cube Bank lets you select questions according to certain areas and certain organ systems, but I like to see students take their Cube Bank questions without knowing at all which subject or organ system we're talking about. That's more simulating a real exam experience. Always do your questions in clusters and under time pressure. Never questions individually. 10 questions, 10 minutes, 20 questions, 20 minutes, 30 questions, 30 minutes. Remember the process I taught you before. Cover the options, focus on the question, then move the paper up so you cover the question and can choose among the options. And beware of believing self-testing. There's a dangerous trap people fall into of doing questions and doing more questions in order to see what their score is. You're not doing questions to see your score. You're doing questions to get information about where you have a deficit so you can go ahead and fix it. You will see your questions' correct performance go up as your study continues. But let's be clear, doing more questions doesn't raise your score, study raises your score. So how are you going to blend together your content study and your practice questions? You're going to begin by doing content study. And when you have a good foundation in place, then you do some practice questions. Based on what you get wrong in those practice questions, now you're directed as to what to go back and study again. Then, more practice questions. Based on what you get wrong in those practice questions, then you want to go back and study again. Then, more practice questions. Based on what you get wrong in those practice questions, you know what to go back and study again. And then, more practice questions. And then, when you're ready, you take the exam and you get your score. This is the process, folks. It's an important issue to nail down. You don't get your score just by study. You don't get your score just by questions. It's the combination of the two together, the reverberation back and forth between study and questions that moves you up this ladder to success. Some of you love content study. Left to your own, that's how you get ready for the exam, and you're afraid to do questions. Others of you love questions. You can't get enough questions. You always want more questions. But left to your own, you won't really do much content study. Folks, it's not content study, it's not questions, it's the blending of the two together that makes all the difference in the process. If you just do content study, I fear for your result. If you just do practice questions, I'm not very confident in you getting the score you want to get. It's study, questions. The reverberation back and forth is truly how this process gets you to where you want to be. Now, I get asked all the time, how do I use Kaplan questions, Kaplan QBank, for example, simulated exams, for example, in order to get a sense of where I am in my process and when I'm ready and how I'm going to do on the exam. So I'm now going to give you some numbers that we have collected from real data. These match the numbers I've been using in sort of clinical encounters with students, and we now have some actual data to support the conjectures we've been working with. If you're doing your questions, and listen, this is important, fresh questions, you've never seen them before, mixed subjects, you know what the subject is before you come to it, under time pressure, these numbers are just about that, fresh questions, mixed subjects, under time pressure. If you're getting less than 55% of your questions correct, you're not ready for prime time. You go in and take the exam, my prediction is you're going to fail. And if you pass, it's going to be almost a fluke. If you're getting between 55 and 60% of your questions correct, your chance of passing is now higher, but your chance of failure is much higher than you ought to feel comfortable with. So your first number is 60%. Getting between 60 and 65% correct, you're likely to pass the exam, although frankly, I don't expect you to get a really high score here. So the real first number is 65%. Getting between 65 and 70% correct, now I expect you to pass the exam, and I expect a vast majority of you to actually beat the mean. But you want that high score, you want the really competitive score, your real number is 70%. You're getting 70% correct, mixed subjects, fresh questions, under time pressure. Now I'm not even thinking about whether or not you're going to fail. Now I feel confident that you're going to pass and get the score you're looking for. Now let's be clear. How do you get to 70%? Not by just doing more questions, but by study, questions, study, questions. It's that back and forth that lifts you up to get where you need to be.